My name is Professor Т.А.Алексеева, and I graduated from this institute so long ago that only with such wonderful company which I see here, I can also be judged, and that's a compliment for me, from myself, you know, to be judged as a young professor, yes? Just, yes, all of you are young presidents. So we are together from this point of view. But nevertheless, I would like also to introduce to you our young scholar. He's my colleague, Ivan Timofeev. He's just PhD, well, probably 2 or 3 years ago, but he's already working very hard. And I asked him to help me if your questions will be so difficult that my generation won't be able to solve them. So let me start with a few words about the Russian politics. You know, the task is as difficult, probably, as if you are asked to describe American or European politics in general. But there is nothing more dull than professors' lectures, you know. Probably you forgot it already, but nevertheless. So I will try to use as few definitions as it is possible, but nevertheless I will need some of them. And let me begin with several questions I would like to cover in my small lecture. You may interrupt me, you may ask questions, and I will be happy if we'll have some kind of discussion or whatever, or dialogue. That's the greatest achievement. Let's try. So I would like to ask several questions which, from my point of view, are rather important for understanding Russian politics. First question: is it a democratic country or not? You are already probably a few days are here. Do you feel that you are in democracy or not? I don't know. But I would like a little bit to cover some of the most important points here. The second question is, what's going on? What is the future? Which problems are the most burning and need the quickest possible salvation or resolvement in this country? And then what I feel like a person from this country, like professor, for the, let's say, the development of the most important trends, how we see the future. And how we see ourselves in, let's say, in contacts with Western countries, or some countries which are included in the West now, and how we feel ourselves in a very complicated world of world crisis, let's say. So I will start with democracy, and then I will make a small pause with questions, and we'll follow. Is it okay with you? Okay. So, is this country a democracy? Quite a complicated question. If you will open the book which is annually published by Freedom House, you will find a definite answer. It is not a democracy. If you will ask a person in the street, mostly of them, they will say, well, we don't know, it is not important, but we are developing in some of the directions, we don't know which one, but it seems to me it is a democracy. No, somebody will tell you. It is not a democratic country at all. We do not have freedom of meetings. This is one of most discussed questions now. And being a professor, I will sooner or later ask a question: what is democracy? Probably this is the most important point here. And what do you know? What we learn if we read literature, by the way, in English, in German, in Russian, in Chinese, in Japanese, etc., etc., and we'll find that it is extremely difficult to define democracy itself. What kind of democracy? Everybody knows that there was so-called elitist democracy, which was described by Max Weber, a very famous scholar. Everybody knows his name. Roughly speaking, elite in the country chooses adequate persons who probably will serve well for the purposes of the country, and then general public which is uneducated mostly, and doesn't understand politics well, will choose among those 3 or 4 appointed, or maybe not appointed, just recommended persons who will later on say that it's quite a democratic country. Is it Russia? In some sense, yes. In some sense, no. Then we take Joseph Schumpeter, who, once again, a German scholar. We celebrate German science, you know, in many aspects. And they say, and he said, this is a procedural democracy, just procedure. With this procedure, like elections from time to time, like change of leaders, like like representation of the people's voices, like freedom of voice, freedom of press, or some other, let's say, very important democratic values. If they exist, this is a democracy. And he's right. Then we go further. And in 1991, when we first met with democracy in this country, which for so many generations was not free at all, from many points of view, we found out that we don't know what we are talking about in many aspects. Look at it. Japan, one and the same party for so many years, for generations, in fact. Doesn't it remind us the Communist Party of the Soviet Union? Oh, just roughly speaking, of course, I do not want to make offense to somebody. Look at Mexico. Since 1910, after the revolution, one and the same party. It changed only 2 years, as far as I remember. Look at the presidents. Look at Federal Republic of Germany, which is just nearby, which we know more probably better than any other country. Michael Kohl was prime minister. One period, then second period, then third period, so it has not changed. So what are the real definitions of democracy, which define it as stable democracy, mature democracy, and democracy which really exists for very many generations? That's just a question from my side. Because if you will think a little bit about it, just look at all that from the side, you will see that there are so many faults and at the same time so many achievements. We celebrate freedom of press. We celebrate freedom of meetings. We celebrate, let's say the state which is based on on law. Of course it is needed. But how to do it very quickly, simultaneously, and in a country which does not have experience, which has history quite discrete, where every president, let's say not president, but maybe every Tsar in this country was beginning history from beginning, saying that all before him were wrong. This is not the right way to go there. And so it is quite possible that to solve all those problems, it's not just a theoretical problem. We have here just now a very interesting seminar. Yesterday I participated in it. Tomorrow, probably after our lecture, I will return back. We invited most prominent American political scientists here. Dan, Adam Przeworski, and other theoreticians of democracy. And we're discussing already for 2 days only one simple question. Why elections are so necessary? And do you think that they have the definite answer? No. Because it is a very difficult and very complicated problem. So, several years ago, the vice leader or manager, top manager of the presidential administration in this country, Vladislav Surkov, with the help of his advisors, introduced a new idea, so-called sovereign democracy. I don't know if you ever heard about it. But it's interesting what kind of reaction did we have in this country? First of all, some group of people, mostly intellectuals, say, well, once again, we are coming back to the so-called state ideology. Probably all our faults and all our instability and all our problems which we have in this country will be now explained by this new theory. That we have quite a specific democracy, not any other countries do. It will be our fun. It will be our special feature. The others say it is just our answer for the decision of the United States, let's say, which began from 70s, to interfere in the inner relations of other countries, saying that they want to, let's say, to bring democracy to those countries. We do not want that somebody will bring something to us, so we'll do it ourselves. It is our sovereign democracy. The third group decided, okay, this is really a very good idea. Because of several reasons, I will be very, very short. People here were not used to democratic procedures. And after, let's say, a rather shortcut upheaval of the 90s, the activity of the population, from the political point of view, started to get down. And we have problems that many people in some regions do not want to go to participate in elections. It is possible to say that probably they just think that nothing depends on them, that their voice is not counted, or something like that. It's a very simple, of course, explanation, but it is not rightful on many aspects. Just they are not used. They don't think that their real life depends on their choice. It does not matter who will be elected. In any case, my personal thing, I'm talking from the let's say, face of the person in the street, my decision, my life, the life of my children, life of my relatives, my living standard does not depend on that. In any case, everything will be solved without us. Anything will be solved without we. Why? Do we have something special here? No, absolutely no. This is a country where, let us say, capitalism started rather lately. Don't forget about it. The capitalist system started to be developing in this country since 1950s. There was a very good advertisement at the beginning of the 90s. And there was a kind of, which was shown over TV many times, which was just a small comparison. Imagine 1950. We still have serfdom for the peasants here. At the same time, Englishmen were already building underground railroad. Absolutely different worlds. And so modernization of the country started very lately. Very late in comparison with other European nations. Then it was stopped after 1917. Very famous Russian philosopher Georgy Fedotov once said that whenever asked, the Russian people will always choose order instead of freedom. It's a very, very interesting observation, which really explains the situation in the country and our political culture. So we need time, and probably Surkov is right in one aspect. We need time, patience, system of education, highly developed system of education, to prepare the future generations, which will finally build the mature democracy, which will be understood in a, broadly speaking, Western type of, Westminster type, how we call it now in political science. So we need time. But do we have this time? Sometimes yes and sometimes no. You know, we live in quite a dangerous world. And some problems which are badly needed to be solved. One of which is, of course, crisis. Crisis meant that we felt it very, very quickly, and let's say in some of the regions it's a real drama. We are too dependable of resources, First of all, oil resources and gas resources. Let us be frank, it's fun to have so many resources as we do. It's possible to buy luxury cars, build excellent houses, enjoy your vacation on Maldives or I don't know where else. But who thinks about the development of economy or of doing it more stabilized or doing it more, let's say, multidimensional? That's a problem. Some people say that this is so-called Holland disease. You know that, what is Holland disease? Too dependable on oil. Everything else is not very important. It's much easier to have, if you have money, to buy it from abroad. And we are buying very much of what we need every day. We are buying food, we are buying clothes, we are buying cars, we are buying machines, we are buying electronics, and we started to notice that probably we are losing our own weight in all those fields. We have very great potential, mostly because of the highly educated people in this country. But we do not know how to use their potential for the development of economy. That's a very great problem, by the way. But I'm not an economist, and I wouldn't like to talk about it. Finishing this first question, I would like to say that, from my point of view, what we have now, this is a so-called hybrid regime. It is not authoritarian in the full sense of the word. But it is also not democratic in all sense of the word. We are somewhere in between. But you know, of course, there is always a danger to fall down if you are sitting on two chairs. So what is really important now is in what direction shall we be moving ahead? To democracy or to returning back to authoritarian regime? There are some signs of both trends. And me personally, let's say, I'm quite optimistic, just because I'm optimistic, being born in a happy family. You know how it is with children. And I hope that nevertheless, even hearing what President Medvedev is saying, and it's, in this country it's always very important what's going on from above. He's saying about political modernization, saying that this is one of the most important trends. What is more important, that it isn't possible to modernize the country without political modernization. Neither innovation will work really if we won't help them with political activity, opening it all for the people who are living here. Just being professor, I'll be dull for several minutes. Public conscious has 3 levels inside of it. The upper level we called innovations. The middle level we'll call traditions. And the third level we will call archaic. And mechanism, it's universal. It's well recognized by the scholars all around the world, is that all 3 levels are developing with different speed. In these countries, they are developing even in different directions. That's one of the most important points, and because of that, it's very difficult to innovate economy, and at the same time to brighten, let's say, political freedoms and things like that. Why? Just briefly, we have problem with the relations between society and state. In fact, our state is moving in one direction and society is moving in another direction. Once again, a kind of split. What to do with that? Of course, there are good ideas of President Medvedev and Prime Minister Putin. They work together. If you will have questions about their relationship, I will probably try to answer, but it is not that important. What is important here is that they are really doing one and the same thing. They are trying to modernize the country, which nearly for 20 years after 1991, when we were trying to let's say, to build here liberal democracy, in fact, we have lost economy. We have lost our scientific potential, etc., etc. Not fully, but on some percentage, and rather high percentage. So we stopped to be developing because we do not have, we have market economy, yes, we say that. It is, we do have. But we do not have the full range of necessities or conditions which are absolutely obligatory for the development of market relations. So you are a businessman, you work like a businessman in this country, you are happily investing, and at the same time you very often meet some absolutely archaic structures, and you don't know how to behave yourself, because the rules which are acting everywhere don't act here. How to correct it? That's another question. Let me return once again to the question which I raised before. What about political culture? Because everything depends on that, and it needs time. Probably sovereign democracy, I don't know. I don't like the term myself, but nevertheless, let's use it. Recently, a very interesting survey was done by one of the sociological centers in this country about how we ourselves define political regime here. Look, just some numbers, it explains some things. Some people, that's about 28.4%, when asked about the type of political regime in this country, said that this is nothing else but oligarchic capitalism. 62, by the way, nearly 3 times more, said that it's a little bit better than criminal and corrupted democracy in Ukraine. It was a kind of comparison. 20% think that we have an authoritarian regime. 20% said that we have a region of the big oil lines and show business, defining probably the most, the features which they can observe on the TV. 14% that think that we are living in the country of the so-called fat cats. That's American term as far as I understand, but we call them a little bit different. Nearly the same. Okay, let's go. And 13 says that this is a sovereign democracy. Probably they are working for their president's administration, presidential administration. And let's say 1% think that we are developed European democracy, and the Europeans themselves do not know what is democracy, and it is high time to explain them that they are wrong. You see that the difference between people is quite big. But in any case, it depends on your situation, where you live. If you live in a big city, that's one story. If you live in a small village, another story. If you have something to do with oil and gas, also you are happy fat cat in some sense. You think, okay, we have European democracy and stop talking about all that. Something like that. It depends on you. But nevertheless, being scholars, of course, we would like to see what is really going on. And I would like to, once again, to emphasize, we do not know. We are somewhere in the middle. Probably we are on a crossroad. Where to go further? Next question. Yeah, sure.
Could you share with us your feeling of if the political leadership of Russia today wants democracy and at what speed?
I think they want democracy. They want democracy. At least President Medvedev seemed to me, that's my personal impression, is quite sincere when he's talking about democracy. But he understands, and he understands very well, like being politician, he needs from time to react to some of the manifestations of political culture, which is more authoritarian, let's say, than our leadership sometimes. They have to react to that. I will bring you only two examples from this point of view. Celebration of victory. You know, the victory in the Second World War, and it was really very traumatic and at the same time very sentimental affair. And really, everybody celebrated in this country because we have lost it, you know, millions and millions, tens of millions of people during that war. There is not a family where nobody was killed. And what is interesting here, that some of the groups of people who are still feel kind of nostalgia on about Stalin, and are thinking about strong head, which is needed here to stop corruption and to stop all that democracy, you know, and to return back to superpower or something like that. They wanted to bring pictures of Stalin to demonstrations and to places where celebrations took place. And it was very interesting because all of us observed what will be the reaction of the government in this country. It is very important. And the reaction was quite clear. No pictures of Stalin. We understand that he was commander-in-chief in the period of the Second World War, but at the same time, he's responsible for millions of people who lost their life in gulags. Because of that, he's not a hero of war. So there were no portraits nearly at least in the big countries, in the big cities, just like Moscow. Another point, it's very interesting with internet. You know that internet in our country is, let's say, free. And from my point of view, internet, if it will be as free as it is today, is the source for the future democratic development. Bureaucracy all around the world needs shocks from time to time. Those shocks are now coming from internet. With pictures, you know, everybody has mobile telephones, making pictures, what's going on, put it into their blogs, everybody's reading, reacting, and finally, let's say the leadership of the country has to invite all those bureaucratic responsible people and say that you are wrong, you need to work harder, you make mistakes, or things like that. So you see different sides of the story. At the same time, the government controls the most important TV channels, you know. And because of that, I know personally many people who do not watch TV just because they don't want to see, let's say, pop music all the time, or let's say a little bit cut of information. But at the same time, you pay and you have 170 channels. You just pay a little bit for that, and not that much. You have CNN, and you know what is said on CNN that is said is in reality, or in breaks. You have BBC, you have Chinese channels, you have Japanese channels, you have Al Jazeera, everything you want. About the discussions, especially in academic world, it is not authoritarian at all. We are discussing everything, and they are quite critical to many events which we do not like in this country. So from my point of view, they are trying to move ahead. But let's say they are trying to move ahead with different speed a little bit, because at least Putin, Prime Minister Putin, seemed to me be more conservative in some of the senses. Yeah.
Maybe I'm completely wrong, but I think just from the history, Russia was always governed autocratically, and Russian people were simply used by the Tsars and by its successors in the communist regime to be governed completely autocratically and to say just nothing. The only act when they gained freedom was Alexander II, and he was killed for that. When he gave freedom to all the people. But that was it. They had freedom, but nothing to say. Mm-hmm. The second Duma, called in by Nicholas II, had nothing to say, but they were called in. So that it was called a parliament, but nothing to say. And in the communist regime, of course, there was kind of a parliament, but it had nothing to say. So people were never used to actually think democratically or even open up their opinion. First topic. And second, yet Russia had always been, if you, to my mind, see into history, a country of a huge difference between poverty on one side of millions of people and an enormous wealth of a few people. No matter if it was aristocracy and a few entrepreneurs in the Russian Tsar Empire, entrepreneurs starting from 1870 on, or if it was under the communist regime, with a few who had their advantage from that. And there was always only a very small intellectual elite, and they always had it very difficult. They always fought for freedom, but they never got it. So the question is, if people in the country for generations have never had another chance to cope with other situations, to learn democracy, it's an enormous process to change that mentality and to change it from the bottom, from the people who are really workers or live in the streets. And there is still an enormous poverty on the other side.
Absolutely agree with you. With every word you just said, you probably just know Russian history quite well. 10% of the poorest, and difference between 10% of the poorest and 10% of the richest in this country is enormous. Some journals show that it's probably 15 times. I think it's much more. Honestly, if all of us probably in this audience sooner or later read Alexis de Tocqueville, Democracy in America, and he was writing there, probably 150 years ago, or even more, that in the country where the difference between the poorest part and the richest part is so big, is potentially a place for the revolution. And he was right, as you know, because the same situation was in Russia under Tsars. You are absolutely right from this point of view. Yeah, yeah. And what about now? I say this, that I'm absolutely sure that the situation now is different, not from the point of richest and poorest, but from the point of that you see that people were used, people were suppressed, people had no voice, etc., etc. We had such a strong and cruel state for so many decades or so many years, mostly because it was necessary to suppress those people in the bottom, just because they wanted to raise their voice. Otherwise, it will never happen. It won't be needed. Let's say in polite or politically correct society, nobody needs strong state which will suppress people. So if this state, look at from the other side, all those gulags, all those problems under Tsars, all those, let's say, difficulties with control over press, etc., etc. This is because it is a kind of fear, because everybody is discussing it here. Even in the period of Stalin, believe me, I know this not personally, but I know it from my parents. There were political jokes which were told from one person to another. We understood that every third will go and write a kind of information to the special forces, but nevertheless, we continued to talk. We continued to discuss. And even now, I will say that if you will say that we do not have freedom of press at all, forget about it. We have limited freedom of press in some of the, let's say, TV channels or whatever. But it doesn't mean that it exists in internet, it exists in the magazines, etc., etc. If I want to read, let's say, estimation of some of the events inside of the country, I may open tens of magazines, and it will be quite critical towards the government. Under socialism, it wasn't possible. So the difference is very big, but we are moving, and if we will be successful, that's another story. You are, as I can see, quite pessimistic. More probably, I'm more optimistic. You know, you never know. But let's see. In any case, I'm talking with you now, maybe at this university, but I'm talking the same with my students. Under socialism, it wasn't possible. Several numbers just to explain this point. Probably other questions are not that important. Once again, survey, sociological survey. Order, according to Russian people, that supports your point of view, or as it is understood as stability of the country, is supported by 41% of the population. It's a big number, but not as huge as under socialism. Under socialism, you will find 90%. Now it is only 40%. Look further. What's most important if we speak about the role of the state? It is social guarantees for the population. 29%, 1/3. You know, this is a critical mass number. Why it is so important? Because it is always very difficult to take back which was once given to people. But what we are now doing, we are turning it back. We are giving it back. Under socialism, we never pay for education. We never pay for medical service. We never pay, nearly nothing paid for flats and apartments. We paid nearly nothing for the public transportation. It was tragically or dramatically overburdened state. Of course, the contemporary state can't survive under the social expenditures of this sort. So they are cut step by step. Now we have started to pay for education at the universities, then we probably will pay even for some type of education at schools, then what will be, now we started to pay to doctors. Of course, we earlier also paid for doctors, but let's say unofficially very often. It was a kind of bribery, in a sense. But nevertheless, the social guarantees are cut step by step. So 29% think that they must be returned back as soon as possible. Democracy. Democracy, which is understood, just pay attention for that. Democracy is understood very simple. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of choice for religion. In a former empire, it's extremely important because we have very many religions, nearly all of the world religions in this country. And they are quite tolerant towards each other, let's say. 44%. Once again, I will compare stability, 41%, and democracy in this limited sense, but nevertheless, 44%. Economic blossom. Good dream in the period of world crisis, as you can see. 28%. So let me survive, and what about the country? That's another story. And now the majority of people are absolutely sure that order is more important than democracy when compared to definitions, you know? 72% say democracy, let it go. We need order and stability. 16% still think that democracy is more important. 16.
1/6.
Da, 1/6. So it's not very good comparison from this point of view. But nevertheless, it exists. It's a real fact of life. I think it's mostly connected with economic situation. Because people are used, we are sick and tired of experiments, let's say. We had so many experiments since 1991 that finally there is a kind of tiredness in the general public. And of course, you think more about money you get, then you think about the possibility to say your, let's say, chief of organization where you work, that he's a fool. That's it. It's a simple. It's not that simple. It's just the situation which we have now. But you know, the numbers are much better than they were 10 years ago, if we'll compare. Then it was something like at 8% for democracy and something like 80% for order. So we need to be optimistic. We are somehow moving ahead in this sense. Yeah.
If you teach your students, what is the reaction of the students of today? What do they want? What do they say? What do you expect?
It's different. Our students are a little bit special, you know. We are literally press them to work rather hard at this university, you know. Just my observation when I work with students will be the following. That some of them are dreaming about careers. You know, when you think about career, you think about stability. That's automatically. It isn't possible to make career in the situation of unstable economy and unstable politics. Some of them are dreaming about big money. You know, that's probably the most important idea in this country now. Everybody wants to be millionaire. But, and there are a lot of them, by the way. You may notice them in the streets even when they're moving ahead. And they also think about stability. It's interesting, yes? And because it's not possible to earn money in the situation of war or revolution, let's say. Believing still, and this is etatist country in many aspects, that we will need to have a strong state. Elderly people, of course, think that we have a weak state which can solve no problems like it is necessary, or things like that. They're very angry from all those points, believing that the state must work in every aspect of life. But in fact, the state had quite a limited influence, at least for the younger generation. And you asked also what will be the general estimation of the situation. Majority, at least of our students, are planning their career in this country and not leaving it for some other place. But maybe I'll just direct this question to my young colleague. He is nearer to them. Please, a few words. Ivan Timofeev, yes.
Yeah. Just a couple of words about, probably to summarize all the questions which were raised. A couple of months ago, we finished a research project which aimed to reveal the attitude of Russians, of ordinary Russians, to the Russian future. What do they expect? Young people, old people, communists, liberals, etc. All of you are businessmen, and your marketing departments in your companies often conduct focus groups. We did the same. It was fun to sit behind the mirror, so that respondents do not see you, eating sandwiches, drinking coffee, and watching what ordinary people are talking and thinking. And I was very much surprised. I expected that something, what you draw, because, and I think you are right, your perception corresponds to what people think here about the Russian history. But what I saw in this experiment was quite shocking for me, because people who were from communist parties and whom we were expecting to share the values of order, strong state, they voiced very strong concerns about freedom, democracy, competition. And this conviction seemed to be very rational. I asked a moderator to ask them why do they think that democracy and freedom is and competition, first of all. No, they are not concerned with democracy, but rather with competition. Why competition is important? And their answer was very much rational, because we want to have a say. We want to influence. And yes, we have nostalgia about USSR, about the past, but we want to promote our interest in a certain procedure, in a predictable procedure. And that is very important regarding your question about what Russian political elite, thinks about democracy. I think their preference in favor of democracy is also very rational. They are not idealists. People who are sitting in the Kremlin and in other buildings around, they are quite rational guys. And democracy is rational for them, because democracy is not only a value. Democracy is institutions. It implies institutions, and institutions imply certainty and stability. Stability for their careers and stability for their political course. So that's actually my
question.
Research.
I actually had a comment more than a question. I want to go back.
You're welcome. Probably you will come to the microphone, otherwise nobody will hear you.
Okay, I'll speak a little bit louder.
Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back and comment about your earlier statement about the situation Russia was in at the point of development. Now, if I look back to India, which is my country, and if we look back to 500 years before that, there were never any freedoms. Earlier, it was ruled by kingdoms. After that, the Mughals came. After that, the British came. So the people had no freedom. The level of wealth difference in India between the poor and rich was probably vaster than it is in Russia, because, you know, again, you had the very rich kings, etc., and you had the common people in poverty. Yet it's difficult to argue that since the day it became independent, it is not a democracy. So I'm not sure that those are necessary conditions for democracy.
Thank you for your comment. As it seems, our organizer is already hinting that we need to come to an end. I just would like to say several words which I think are extremely important. You know, well, the country is huge. The country is extremely rich. People are not that rich like a country because, let's say, the resources are divided, of course, not equally. We had a great experiment with the Soviet power and, you know, building socialism and trying to divide it all more or less equally. We were not lucky with that, as you know, because even for some generations, let's say, it was needed too much of efforts to, let's say, to build the country like it is now. This is a country where patriotism is very high. And mostly this is one of the very important reasons why we support the state interference in very many aspects. We still believe, at least the majority of the population, that the state is responsible for everything, for good and for bad. But we are moving ahead, maybe not as quickly as our liberals wanted in 1991, in the period of collapse of the Soviet Union. But when we are working with young people, with young generations, I can assure you that we see very many positive signs if we'll find the real democracy, full-scale democracy, to be the real value. I think we'll need to do it. They are much better than we were. In many aspects, they're moving faster, they're thinking harder, and let's say they know much more than we did in their period of time with quite limited knowledge at the same. If we'll compare, answering your question, if we'll compare the general situation like it was under Tsars and then general secretaries of the Soviet Union or whatever, it's absolutely different country. But this is a country which would like to preserve itself and to be, let us say, where it is possible and it's, well, quite comfortable to live. I think we are, nevertheless, maybe sometimes more slowly than we wanted, but we are moving in that direction. And I believe in the young generation, they will really do their task. They themselves think about it, and think about it much. That I think it's quite an optimistic point. Not our generation already. By the way, it's rather funny because your organizers told us that there will be the young businessmen and young politicians in your group. It seems to me that we are more or less in one and the same generation scale. And you understand that the future one of the young men, look at the student who is sitting here, he will assure me, and young postgraduate students, they are different already than we were. Very different. Me personally, I'm thinking that we'll survive. We'll survive and not once again turning back to, let's say, as you say, strong authoritarian regime and usage of people, etc., etc. The world is different. We live in a globalized world. But it is not so easy just to open the door, open the window, jump inside and say, well, we are Western country with all those values and so forth and so forth. It's a fight. We need to move step by step, but we are moving. Maybe for some people too slow, but not so slow. Believe me, I'm living here. I can notice. Thank you so much for your attention.